The fluorescent lights hummed overhead like dying insects, casting their sterile glow across rows of olive-green metal chairs. Captain Zara Ghost Akafer shifted uncomfortably in the third row, her weathered flight jacket creaking against the cheap upholstery. Around her, 24 pilots fidgeted through another mandatory briefing about enhanced combat readiness protocols, military speak for, "We're preparing for something we can't tell you about yet." She'd been through this dance before. The PowerPoint slides, the carefully rehearsed talking points, the way senior officers' eyes would skip over her like she was furniture. At 28, with 3 combat tour and a distinguished flying cross tucked away in some forgotten file cabinet, Zara had learned to find other ways to occupy her mind during these sessions. Today, she found herself sketching aircraft silhouettes in the margins of her notepad, sleek F-22 Raptors, their angular profiles cutting through imaginary clouds. Her pencil moved with the unconscious precision of someone who'd spent countless hours in cockpits, reading the sky like others read books. Colonel Marcus Reed droned on about asymmetric threats and force multiplication, his laser pointer dancing across aerial photographs of some unnamed desert installation. The same generic briefing they'd received monthly for the past 6 months, ever since the 34th Fighter Squadron had been quietly reassigned to Nelly's Air Force Base under circumstances no one discussed in polite company. Zara's attention drifted toward the reinforced windows, where the Nevada desert stretched endlessly under a sky the color of old brass. Somewhere out there, beyond the restricted airspace and classified flight corridors, real missions were happening. Real pilots were making decisions that mattered. Meanwhile, she sat here listening to Reed explain the tactical advantages of maintaining operational security for the 100th time. The irony wasn't lost on her. 3 years ago, she'd been leading strike packages over hostile territory, her call sign whispered with a mixture of respect and unease by enemy radar operators who could never quite get a lock on her aircraft. Now she was grounded by bureaucracy and politics, relegated to training exercises and paperwork while younger, less experienced pilots took the missions that should have been hers. But something felt different about today's briefing. Reed's usual practiced confidence seemed forced, and she'd noticed several unfamiliar faces in the back row, men in expensive suits who didn't belong in a military briefing room. Their presence created an undercurrent of tension that even the most oblivious pilot couldn't ignore. Reed clicked to a new slide, and for the first time in months, Zara looked up from her sketching. The image showed a tactical map with red zones marked across 3 continents. Whatever was coming, it was bigger than training exercises. "Ladies and gentlemen," Reed said, his voice carrying a weight that made every pilot in the room straighten unconsciously, "we need to discuss operational assignments for the coming quarter." He began reading names from a classified roster, matching call signs to mission codes that meant nothing to most of the assembled pilots. "Viper, you're assigned to red flag exercises. Falcon, domestic air defense rotation. Hawk, instructor duties at the academy." The pattern continued. Experienced pilots shuffled into safe, predictable roles while the real action went elsewhere. Zara half listened, already knowing her name wouldn't appear on any meaningful assignment. The ghost call sign had become more literal than metaphorical over the past year. She'd been systematically erased from operational consideration, her record buried under layers of bureaucratic doubt and institutional bias. She returned to her sketching, adding details to the Raptor's engine intakes, when Reed's voice suddenly stopped mid-sentence. The silence stretched uncomfortably, broken only by the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of aircraft taxiing on the runway outside. Zara looked up to find Reed staring directly at her, his face pale beneath his regulation haircut. The classified roster trembled slightly in his hands, and for a moment he seemed to have forgotten how to speak. "Sir," someone prompted from the front row. Reed cleared his throat, but his voice cracked anyway. "Ghost," he said, the the word hanging in the air like a prayer or a curse. Captain Akafor. His eyes never left her face, and Zara felt the familiar chill that came with being singled out for reasons she couldn't yet understand. The room had gone completely still. Even the suits in the back row were leaning forward, their attention focused on the exchange between Reed and the pilot who'd been invisible for so long that most of her squadron mates had forgotten she existed. "Yes, sir," Zara replied, her voice steady despite the growing knot in her stomach. Reed's hand moved to a different folder, one marked with classification stamps she'd never seen before. When he spoke again, his words carried the weight of something that would change everything. "Pack your gear, Captain. You're being reactivated." The fluorescent lights continued their insect hum, but now the sound felt different, urgent, alive with possibility. Zara set down her pencil, leaving the sketched raptor unfinished on the page, and prepared to discover why a colonel had just looked at her like he'd seen a ghost rise from the dead. Through the reinforced windows, the Nevada sky stretched endless and waiting, holding secrets that only someone with her particular skills would be trusted to uncover. The real question wasn't where she was going, but whether the military was finally ready to acknowledge what the ghost had always been capable of. After 18 months of bureaucratic purgatory, Captain Zara Akafor was about to remember what it felt like to fly into the unknown. And for the first time in longer than she cared to admit, she felt truly alive. Reed handed her the classified folder with hands that shook almost imperceptibly. "Your transport leaves in 2 hours," he said. "Destination classified until wheels up. This briefing is concluded." As the room emptied around them, Zara remained seated, holding the folder that felt heavier than it should have. Whatever lay ahead, she knew her days of sketching aircraft from the sidelines were finally over. The Ghost was about to become operational again, and the sky itself seemed to hold its breath in anticipation. The C-130 Hercules banked hard to the left, its 4 turboprops straining against mountain winds that seemed determined to tear the aircraft from the sky. Captain Zara Akafor pressed her face against the small porthole, watching peaks shrouded in cloud cover slide past like sleeping giants. The transport's interior vibrated with mechanical determination, each rivet and bolt testament to decades of military engineering, designed to get personnel from point A to point B regardless of weather, terrain, or enemy action. She'd been airborne for 6 hours, crossing time zones and classified airspace without any real understanding of her destination. The crew chief, a weathered master sergeant with 30 years of service etched into his face, had been professionally courteous but offered no information beyond meal times and safety protocols. Standard procedure for black operations, where need to know meant exactly that. The classified folder lay unopened in her lap. Reed's instructions had been explicit. Read only after reaching cruising altitude over international waters. She'd followed orders, waiting until the pilot announced they'd cleared the continental United States before breaking the wax seal and discovering her new reality. Operation Nightfall. The code name alone suggested something that operated in shadows, beyond the reach of conventional oversight. The mission parameters were unlike anything she'd encountered in her previous deployments, a blend of air superiority, reconnaissance, and what the documents euphemistically termed special insertion capabilities. Translation: someone needed to fly into places where normal aircraft couldn't survive, carrying personnel or equipment that officially didn't exist. Her target aircraft was listed as classified prototype, designation TF-1 Advanced Tactical Fighter. No specifications, no performance data, just a note that she'd received familiarization training upon arrival. The location was identified only as Forward Operating Base Meridian, coordinates provided in a format she didn't recognize. What caught her attention wasn't what the documents contained, but what they didn't. No mention of squadron assignment, no chain of command beyond a contact designated Control 7, no return date or rotation schedule. This wasn't a temporary deployment. It was something closer to exile, except exiles weren't usually handed experimental aircraft and told to prepare for immediate combat operations. The Hercules shuddered through another patch of turbulence, reminding Zara why she preferred fighter aircraft to transport planes. Fighters responded to pilot input with precision and grace. Transports were flying brick walls that happened to have wings attached. She'd logged enough hours in both to appreciate the difference, though she'd never admit her preference to the transport crews who risked their lives hauling cargo and personnel into hostile territory. Her phone had lost signal hours ago, not that she'd expected to maintain communication during a classified deployment. The isolation was deliberate, designed to prevent operational security breaches and ensure complete focus on mission requirements. Still, she found herself checking the device periodically, a nervous habit left over from civilian life when staying connected had mattered more than staying alive. Outside the porthole, the landscape shifted from mountains to desert, then to something that looked like the surface of Mars, red rock formations jutting from sandy expanses that stretched beyond the horizon. This wasn't any part of the world she recognized from her previous deployments, which raised uncomfortable questions about exactly how far from home she'd traveled. The crew chief appeared beside her seat, offering a bottle of water and what passed for a reassuring smile. "About an hour out, Captain," he said, his voice barely audible over the engine noise. "Might want to get some rest. Word is you'll be busy once we touch down." She accepted the water gratefully, realizing she hadn't eaten or drunk anything since leaving Nellie's. Stress had a way of suppressing basic biological needs, replacing hunger and thirst with adrenaline and anticipation. Combat pilots learn to recognize the signs and compensate accordingly, maintaining physical readiness regardless of mental state. The mission briefing included medical clearance forms she'd never seen before, psychological evaluations, stress tolerance assessments, and something called operational resilience protocols that sounded more like science fiction than military doctrine. Whatever they were preparing her for, it went beyond conventional air-to-air combat or close air support missions. Her distinguished flying cross citation lay tucked between the classified documents, a reminder of what she'd already proven under fire. 3 enemy aircraft destroyed, 2 high-value targets eliminated, and a successful combat search and rescue operation that had brought 12 Marines home alive. The medal had been presented quietly, without fanfare or media attention, because officially the missions it recognized had never happened. Now she was being asked to disappear again, this time more completely than ever before. The ghost call sign had always carried implications of stealth and invisibility, but this assignment suggested something approaching complete erasure from official records. She would become a pilot without a squadron, flying aircraft that didn't exist on missions that would never be acknowledged. The Hercules began its descent, engines changing pitch as the pilot adjusted power settings for approach. Through the porthole, she could see lights scattered across the desert floor, not the regular pattern of a city or town, but the purposeful arrangement of a military installation designed to be invisible from casual observation. Forward Operating Base Meridian resolved itself into a collection of hardened aircraft shelters, administrative buildings, and support facilities that could have been lifted wholesale from any number of classified locations around the world. The difference was in the aircraft parked on the flight line. Shapes she didn't recognize, angular and aggressive in ways that suggested capabilities beyond current operational aircraft. As the Hercules touched down with characteristic transport aircraft grace, which is to say, barely controlled violence, Zara gathered her gear and prepared for whatever came next. The classified folder went back into her flight bag, its contents memorized through years of military training that emphasized retention of critical information. The crew chief opened the cargo door, letting desert air rush into the aircraft's interior. The smell was immediately familiar, aviation fuel, hot metal, and the particular atmosphere that surrounded military installations in remote locations. Home wasn't the right word, but it was close enough. Captain Zara Ghost Okafor stepped onto the tarmac of Forward Operating Base Meridian, leaving behind everything she'd known about her military career, and walking toward an aircraft that would redefine everything she thought she understood about flying. In the distance, something that might have been a fighter jet was being towed into one of the hardened shelters, its outline suggesting capabilities that belonged more in science fiction than operational reality. The desert wind carried the sound of jet engines spooling up somewhere beyond the flight line, a reminder that while she'd been traveling, others had been preparing for whatever mission required her particular combination of skills and clearance level. The Ghost had arrived at her new hunting ground, and the real work was about to begin. The briefing room at Forward Operating Base Meridian looked like every other classified facility Zara had ever seen: reinforced walls, no windows, and electronic countermeasures humming invisibly in the background to prevent eavesdropping. What made this one different were the people waiting for her arrival, a mixture of military personnel and civilians who didn't quite fit the standard contractor profile. Colonel Sarah Chen stood as Zara entered, her bearing unmistakably military despite civilian clothes that suggested she'd been operating outside normal channels for some time. "Captain Okafor, welcome to Meridian. I'm Control 7, though you can use Chen when we're not on official channels." Her handshake was firm, professional, and carried the subtle assessment that senior officers use to evaluate new personnel. "Thank you, ma'am. Reporting as ordered." Zara's response was automatic, but she was already cataloging details about her new commanding officer. The way Chen positioned herself to maintain visual contact with all exits, the slight bulge under her left arm that suggested a concealed weapon, and the particular alertness that came from extended operations in hostile environments. "Sit down, Ghost. We have a lot to cover and not much time." Chen gestured toward a chair facing a wall-mounted display screen currently showing satellite imagery of what appeared to be a heavily fortified compound. "What do you know about advanced aerospace development programs?" The question was clearly a test. Officially, whatever's in the public domain about the F-22 and F-35 programs. Unofficially, Zara paused, choosing her words carefully. "I know that what the public sees is usually 10 to 15 years behind what's actually being tested." Chen smiled for the first time since Zara's arrival. "Good answer. What you're about to see is closer to 25 years ahead of anything in current operational service." She clicked a remote, and the satellite imagery was replaced by technical specifications for an aircraft that looked like it had been designed by someone who'd never heard of conventional aerodynamics. The TF-1 Advanced Tactical Fighter was unlike anything Zara had encountered in her military career. Its airframe seemed to shift depending on viewing angle, surfaces flowing together in curves that suggested both speed and stealth capabilities beyond current generation aircraft. The specifications listed performance parameters that should have been impossible: Mach 3 plus at sea level, operational ceiling above 80,000 feet, and combat radius that approached intercontinental range. "This is what you'll be flying," Chen continued, "assuming you pass qualification requirements that frankly no other pilot has managed to complete." The statement was delivered without emotion, but Zara caught the challenge implicit in the words. The TF-1 incorporates technologies that require pilot capabilities significantly beyond current training standards. More technical displays followed, weapons systems that could engage targets from ranges measured in hundreds of miles, defensive countermeasures that rendered conventional missiles ineffective, and flight controls that responded to neural input rather than physical manipulation. The aircraft wasn't just advanced. It was a fundamental reimagining of what a fighter jet could be. "Questions so far?" Chen asked. "Several hundred," Zara replied, studying a cutaway diagram that showed the TF-1's internal systems. starting with how something this advanced managed to get built without anyone in the conventional military knowing about it. That's classified above your current clearance level, but I can tell you it's been in development for longer than you might expect. Chen's tone suggested the answer involved political and technological complexities that extended far beyond normal military procurement. What matters for your purposes is that it works, and we need someone capable of flying it operationally. The display shifted to mission parameters that immediately explained why Zara had been selected despite her recent bureaucratic difficulties. The TF-1 was designed for penetrating heavily defended airspace and engaging targets that conventional aircraft couldn't reach. Exactly the type of missions that had earned her the Distinguished Flying Cross and the Ghost Call sign. The opposition has developed capabilities that pose a direct threat to national security, Chen explained, her voice taking on the formal cadence used for classified briefings. Conventional response options have been evaluated and found inadequate. The TF-1 represents our most advanced countermeasure, but it requires a pilot with your specific combination of combat experience and adaptability to unconventional flight systems. Satellite imagery returned to the main display, showing the fortified compound from earlier, but with enhanced detail that revealed surface-to-air missile sites, radar installations, and what appeared to be an underground aircraft hangar large enough to house strategic bombers. Your first mission will be reconnaissance of this facility, located in a region where official military action would create unacceptable political complications. The implications were clear without being explicitly stated. This was black operations territory, where success would never be acknowledged and failure would be disavowed by everyone involved. Zara had operated in similar gray areas before, but never with equipment this advanced or stakes this high. Timeline, she asked. Familiarization training begins immediately. Combat readiness evaluation in 72 hours. Mission launch within the week, assuming you can master the TF-1 systems. Chen's expression suggested she had doubts about the timeline, though whether those doubts concerned the aircraft or Zara's abilities remained unclear. The briefing continued for another hour, covering logistics, communication protocols, and contingency procedures that assumed things would go wrong in ways conventional military planning didn't address. By the end, Zara understood that she was being asked to risk her life flying an experimental aircraft into heavily defended territory to gather intelligence that might prevent something significantly worse from happening. Standard Tuesday for a combat pilot, except for the experimental aircraft part. Chen stood as the briefing concluded, gathering classified documents with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd spent years handling sensitive material. Your gear will be delivered to quarters B7. Flight training begins at 600 tomorrow. Any questions that can't wait? Just one, Zara replied. Why me? There are pilots with more recent combat experience and higher security clearances. Chen paused at the door, turning back with an expression that mixed respect with something approaching sympathy. Because none of them have ever been shot down over hostile territory and managed to evade capture for 11 days while calling in close air support for a Marine unit pinned down 30 miles behind enemy lines. She opened the door, then added, "The ghost call sign wasn't assigned randomly, Captain. You earned it by being invisible when you needed to be and lethal when it mattered." The TF-1 requires both capabilities. As Chen left, Zara remained in the briefing room, staring at the technical displays that still showed cross-sections of the aircraft she'd be flying within days. The TF-1 represented technology that shouldn't exist, deployed on missions that officially weren't happening, flown by a pilot who'd been systematically erased from conventional military consideration. She'd wanted to return to operational status, but this went far beyond anything she'd imagined. The Ghost was about to become something unprecedented, a pilot operating at the intersection of cutting-edge technology and absolute deniability, where success or failure would be measured not in enemy aircraft destroyed, but in threats prevented before they could materialize. Outside the briefing room, the desert night was alive with the sound of aircraft engines and the controlled chaos of a military installation operating under wartime protocols. Somewhere in one of those hardened shelters, the TF-1 waited for a pilot capable of unlocking its full potential. Captain Zara, Ghost, Akafor walked toward her quarters, carrying the weight of knowledge that would fundamentally change how she understood her role in national defense. Tomorrow, she would begin learning to fly an aircraft that existed at the boundary between current technology and science fiction. Tonight, she needed to prepare mentally for challenges that no amount of conventional training could have anticipated. The desert stars overhead seemed unusually bright, as if the clear air at Meridian revealed celestial details normally hidden by atmospheric interference. Soon, she'd be flying at altitudes where those stars would be visible during daylight, pushing the boundaries of what human pilots could achieve when given the right tools and sufficient motivation. The TF-1 Advanced Tactical Fighter sat in its climate-controlled hangar like a predator waiting to hunt. At first glance, it barely resembled conventional aircraft. Its surfaces flowed together in curves that seemed to shift depending on viewing angle, creating an optical effect that made depth perception difficult even from close range. The stealth characteristics were immediately obvious, but this went beyond radar invisibility into something approaching visual concealment. Chief Master Sergeant Maria Santos approached from the aircraft's port side, her weathered hands carrying diagnostic tablets and a level of familiarity that suggested months of working with the TF-1's unique systems. "Captain, meet your new ride. She's temperamental, demanding, and probably smarter than both of us combined, but she'll keep you alive in situations that would turn conventional fighters into expensive debris." Zara walked slowly around the aircraft, noting details that challenged everything she understood about aerodynamics and flight control systems. The TF-1's wings were barely visible, integrated so completely with the fuselage that the entire airframe appeared to be a single flowing surface. Landing gear was retracted into compartments that left no external indication of their presence, contributing to an overall profile that seemed more grown than manufactured. "Specifications said neural interface controls," she said, running her hand along a surface that felt warm despite the hangar's controlled temperature. "How does that actually work?" Santos smiled with the particular expression maintenance personnel used when explaining complex systems to pilots who thought they understood their aircraft. "See these contact points along the helmet interior?" She held up a flight helmet that looked like something from a science fiction film, its surface covered in nearly invisible sensors and microprocessors. They monitor brain activity patterns and translate specific thoughts into flight control inputs. Takes about 40 hours of training to establish the neural pathways, assuming you don't drive yourself crazy first. The cockpit was unlike anything Zara had seen in 15 years of military aviation. Instead of conventional instruments, the pilot position featured a single wraparound display that could apparently show anything from engine parameters to global satellite imagery. Flight controls were present but minimal. A control stick that seemed to move in response to thought rather than physical pressure, and rudder pedals that were more suggestion than requirement. "First lesson," Santos continued, helping Zara into the pilot's seat. "Forget everything you know about flying. The TF-1 doesn't respond to conventional control inputs because it doesn't use conventional flight principles. The airframe generates lift-through methods that are classified above both our pay grades, but the practical result is that you can ignore most of the laws of physics that normally limit aircraft performance." The helmet interface process felt like having someone rewire her brain. As the sensors made contact, Zara experienced a moment of disorientation followed by a flood of information that seemed to come from the aircraft itself rather than the display systems. Engine status, environmental data, and navigation information appeared directly in her consciousness without requiring visual reference to instruments. "Think about moving forward," Santos instructed. Don't touch the controls, just imagine the aircraft responding to your intention. The TF-1's engine spooled up without any physical input from Zara, their sound unlike anything she'd heard from conventional turbofans. Rather than the harsh roar of burning jet fuel, these power plants produced a nearly musical tone that suggested fundamentally different propulsion technology. The aircraft began moving forward with a smoothness that defied the mechanical nature of landing gear and taxiways. "Outstanding," Santos said through the intercom system. "Most pilots take 3 or 4 sessions to achieve basic neural interface. You're responding like you were born for this." The next hour involved exercises designed to establish control pathways between Zara's conscious intentions and the aircraft's response systems. Banking, climbing, acceleration changes, all accomplished through focused thought rather than physical manipulation of flight controls. The learning curve was steep, but Zara found herself adapting to the interface faster than the training protocols anticipated. "Time for the interesting part," Santos announced. "Engine startup for flight operations." The TF-1's transformation from ground vehicle to aircraft was unlike anything in Zara's experience. Rather than the gradual power increase of conventional engines, the advanced propulsion system came online with an immediate availability of thrust that seemed to ignore the normal relationship between fuel flow and power output. The aircraft didn't just become ready to fly. It became eager, like a living creature finally allowed to express its true nature. "Takeoff clearance granted," came the voice from Meridian Control Tower. "TF-1, you're cleared for unrestricted climb to flight level 800. Caution advised for commercial traffic at normal operating altitudes." Flight level 800, 80,000 feet, well above the operational ceiling of any conventional aircraft, and approaching the boundary between atmosphere and space. The clearance alone indicated capabilities that existed outside normal aviation parameters. Zara focused her thoughts on vertical ascent, and the TF-1 responded by defying gravity in ways that seemed to mock conventional aircraft performance. They climbed at angles that should have resulted in immediate stall conditions, maintaining airspeed that increased rather than decreased with altitude. The sensation was less like flying an aircraft and more like willing herself through three-dimensional space. "How is this possible?" she asked Santos, watching the altimeter spin past 60,000 feet while the aircraft continued accelerating. "Classified, but I can tell you it involves manipulating fundamental forces rather than just pushing air around with wings and engines." Santos' voice carried the satisfaction of someone who worked with technology that represented a genuine leap forward rather than incremental improvement. "The practical result is that you can go places and do things that no other aircraft can match." At 80,000 feet, the sky had turned deep purple, and the curvature of the Earth was clearly visible below. Commercial aircraft appeared as tiny specks moving along invisible highways 40,000 feet below, following predictable routes between major cities. From this altitude, the organized nature of human civilization was clearly apparent. Transportation networks, urban centers, and the artificial boundaries that separated nations. "Ready for combat systems orientation?" Santos asked. The TF-1's weapons capabilities were integrated into the neural interface, appearing in Zara's consciousness as naturally as her awareness of the aircraft's speed and altitude. Rather than conventional missiles or cannon systems, the tactical options included directed energy weapons, electronic warfare capabilities, and what the system described as kinetic intervention systems. Terminology that suggested ways of eliminating targets without using explosive warheads. "Target acquisition uses thought-directed sensors," Santos explained. "Focus on something you want to examine, and the aircraft will automatically gather all available intelligence about that target. The system can identify aircraft types, assess threat levels, and recommend engagement options faster than conventional radar systems." A formation of conventional fighters appeared on the display, F-16s conducting training exercises at normal operational altitudes. Zara focused her attention on the lead aircraft and immediately received a complete tactical assessment including pilot identity, weapons load, and mission parameters. The information appeared to come from sources that shouldn't have been accessible to a single aircraft, suggesting intelligence-gathering capabilities that extended far beyond conventional sensors. Impressive, Zara said, and probably illegal under several international treaties. Only if officially acknowledged, Santos replied with the practical cynicism of career military personnel. The TF-1 operates in gray areas where conventional rules don't necessarily apply. The flight training continued for another 2 hours, covering advanced maneuvers that would have been impossible in conventional aircraft. High-speed turns that ignored G-force limitations, instantaneous direction changes that should have torn the airframe apart, and acceleration profiles that suggested the laws of physics were more like guidelines than absolute constraints. By the time they returned to Meridian, Zara understood that she wasn't just learning to fly a new aircraft. She was being introduced to capabilities that represented a fundamental advancement in what human pilots could achieve when given access to sufficiently advanced technology. The landing was as unconventional as everything else about the TF-1. Rather than the gradual descent and careful energy management required by normal aircraft, the advanced fighter simply transitioned from flight to ground operations as if the distinction were arbitrary. Touchdown was barely perceptible, followed by a taxi back to the hardened shelter that seemed more like a gentle glide than mechanical ground movement. Questions? Santos asked as they completed post-flight procedures. Hundreds, Zara replied, removing the neural interface helmet and feeling momentarily disoriented by the return to conventional sensory input. But I think the important one is, when do I get to find out what this thing can really do? Santos smiled with the expression of someone who'd been waiting for exactly that question. Tomorrow, Captain. Tomorrow we find out if the Ghost can handle what the TF-1 was really designed for. As they secured the aircraft in its climate-controlled environment, Zara realized that her understanding of military aviation had been fundamentally altered in the space of a single training flight. The TF-1 represented capabilities that existed at the intersection of current technology and what might be possible given unlimited resources and the willingness to ignore conventional limitations. The mission briefing at 4:30 hours carried a weight that immediately distinguished it from training exercises. Colonel Chen stood before a wall display showing real-time satellite imagery of the target facility, her expression conveying the particular tension that preceded combat operations. Around the table, personnel from various specialties, intelligence analysts, communications technicians, and what appeared to be civilian contractors, waited with the focused attention that accompanied missions where failure wasn't just disappointing but potentially catastrophic. Ghost, your reconnaissance mission launches in 6 hours, Chen began, clicking through satellite images that showed increasing detail of the fortified compound. Intelligence indicates the facility houses advanced aerospace development programs that pose a direct threat to national security. Your task is to gather detailed information about their capabilities without alerting them to our surveillance. The target was located in a region where official military action would create international complications, requiring the kind of deniable operations that the TF-1 was designed to support. The compound featured multiple hardened structures, sophisticated air defense systems, and what appeared to be an underground hangar capable of housing aircraft significantly larger than conventional fighters. Threat assessment, said Major Williams, the intelligence officer who'd been tracking the facility for months. Surface-to-air missile sites with estimated engagement ranges up to 50 miles, early warning radar systems that can detect conventional aircraft at ranges exceeding 100 miles, and electronic warfare capabilities that have successfully jammed reconnaissance satellites on 3 separate occasions. The defensive systems alone would have made the target inaccessible to conventional aircraft, but Williams' briefing suggested threats that went beyond standard military hardware. Recent signals intelligence indicates they've developed countermeasures specifically designed to defeat stealth technology. Whatever they're working on, they're taking extraordinary precautions to prevent outside observation. Zara studied the tactical displays, mentally calculating approach routes that would minimize exposure to defensive systems while maintaining the sensor contact necessary for effective reconnaissance. The TF-1's capabilities offered options that weren't available to conventional aircraft, but the mission would still require careful planning and precise execution. Flight profile, Chen continued. Initial approach at maximum altitude to avoid surface-based detection systems. Descent to optimal sensor range only after confirming defensive system locations and operational status. Primary objective is photographic intelligence of internal facility layout, with secondary priority on electronic intelligence gathering regarding their aerospace development programs. The mission parameters were complicated by time constraints that left little margin for extended surveillance. Intelligence suggested that whatever the facility was developing would soon reach operational status, making this reconnaissance mission the last opportunity to gather information before the threat became fully active. Extraction routes, Williams added, highlighting flight paths that would take Zara through airspace controlled by potentially hostile forces, include 3 primary options and 2 emergency alternatives. Communication protocols assume that normal radio contact will be compromised, requiring burst transmission methods that won't reveal aircraft location to enemy electronic warfare systems. The technical briefing covered TF-1 sensor capabilities that were classified beyond Zara's current clearance level, but the practical applications were clear enough. The aircraft could gather intelligence through methods that didn't require visual or radar contact, using sensor systems that operated outside conventional detection parameters. Weather conditions, reported the meteorological officer, include high-altitude wind patterns that will affect approach timing and low-level atmospheric conditions that could impact sensor effectiveness. Solar activity is currently minimal, reducing the risk of electronic system interference during critical mission phases. The briefing concluded with contingency procedures that assumed various levels of mission compromise, from detection by enemy sensors to active engagement by defensive systems. Each scenario included specific protocols designed to maximize intelligence gathering while preserving aircraft and pilot for future operations. Questions, Chen asked. Rules of engagement, Zara replied. What happens if I'm detected and engaged by defensive systems? Avoid engagement if possible. Respond with minimum necessary force if unavoidable, Chen answered with the careful phrasing used for operations that officially didn't exist. Priority is mission completion and aircraft preservation, in that order. Personnel recovery options are limited given the operational area and political sensitivities. The implication was clear. If things went wrong, Zara would be on her own in hostile territory with minimal prospects for rescue or support. Standard procedure for black operations, but somehow more serious when conducted with experimental aircraft in regions where conventional military response wasn't possible. Final preparations involved equipment checks that went far beyond normal pre-flight procedures. The TF-1 sensor systems required calibration against known reference points. Communication equipment needed encryption keys that changed hourly, and the neural interface required biometric confirmation that Zara was the authorized pilot. Weather update, announced the meteorological officer. Optimal flight conditions for the next 8-hour window, with scattered cloud cover that will provide additional concealment during low-altitude phases of the mission. Chief Santos conducted the pre-flight inspection with the thoroughness that experimental aircraft demanded, checking systems that existed nowhere else in military aviation. All neural interface parameters nominal, she reported. Propulsion systems operating within classified performance specifications. Sensor arrays fully functional and calibrated for operational environment. The TF-1 sat in its hangar like a predator preparing for a hunt, its unusual airframe somehow conveying readiness despite its alien appearance. Pre-flight procedures involved systems that required clearances Zara didn't possess, but Santos handled the classified aspects with practiced efficiency. "Ghost, you're cleared for engine start," came the voice from Meridian Control. "Flight plan filed for high-altitude reconnaissance, with routing that will keep you clear of commercial traffic and international boundaries." The engine startup sequence was accompanied by sounds that belonged more in science fiction than military aviation. Rather than the familiar roar of conventional turbofans, the TF-1's propulsion system produced tones that suggested fundamentally different methods of generating thrust. The aircraft came alive with an eagerness that conventional fighters couldn't match. "Tower, Ghost requesting clearance for departure," Zara transmitted, her voice steady despite the knowledge that she was about to undertake the most challenging mission of her military career. "Ghost, cleared for immediate departure. Climb unrestricted to flight level 800. Contact Control 7 on secure frequency once clear of local airspace." The takeoff was unlike anything in Zara's 15 years of military aviation. Rather than